Hi, everybody. Just wanted to share one of my favorite leadership quotes with you that I think sets the stage for this theme video of seeking the best for others. This quote comes from Bob Buford, who did many things, was active in kind of the faith work leadership space, started an organization called Halftime, which helped leaders think about what they were going to do in the second half of their lives. Aligns very well with our first, second, and third of responding to God's callings here at the Dupree Center. But Mr. Buford said that the fruit of our lives and our leadership will grow on other people's trees. The fruit of our leadership, the fruit of your leadership will grow on other people's trees. That's a really provocative quote. And I think just really gets at the fact that so much of our work is to genuinely seek the best or seek the flourishing of others. But what does that look like? I mean, it's the kind of idea that most people would say, yeah, that's a good idea. We should seek the best for others. And even can show up well. The optics can be good, but what happens when it's beyond performance or kind of done in a performative way, when it's beyond the optics, when it's beyond something that lines up with strategy and just comes down to the daily, ordinary moments, the hidden moments of our work? At the Dupree Center, we often say that leadership is less about outcomes, though we think outcomes matter, but fundamentally about who we're becoming in response to God's callings. And we think that the faithful service in response to God's callings then shapes the kind of outcomes and metrics and work that we're up to in the world. We know that who we're becoming, especially for people in leadership positions or with influence over others, has the potential to have an enormous ripple effect. We think about 10 leaders, 50 leaders, 100, 2,000, 10,000, 100,000, whatever the number is, if each one of those people positively impacted and genuinely sought the best for 10 other people in their sphere, imagine the ripple effect. Imagine the change. That's the kind of thing that we think is possible here at the Dupree Center. So I just want to talk a little bit about this idea of what does it mean to seek the best for others, not just as a leadership strategy, but as a deeply Christian practice where we imagine and anticipate that the fruit of that work will indeed come to bear on other people's trees. So we do a lot with the Good Samaritan. We do here at the Dupree Center, this Luke 10:27 passage in which God, the lawyer stands up and says, what does it look like to love your neighbor? And Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan, which comes down to the fact that our role here is to love God and love our neighbors as ourselves, which involves loving God, loving neighbors, and loving ourselves. But how does that play out? How does that love other people, the seeking the best for them, actually play out when things get more complex, when they get difficult, when we have people who we don't feel like they're seeking the best for us, or the conditions that we have feel like we can seek the best for some people, but not for other people, right? When these things become difficult. It's not the same thing as making everybody happy or avoiding conflict or honestly even finding win-win. Sometimes that's not possible. It's about instead working toward people's flourishing. We define flourishing in other places. This is biblical imagery, comes from lots of places, but we often go to the Psalms here at the Dupree Center and think about trees that are planted near streams of water whose leaves are not withering, right? It's healthy, this prosperous tree in our job that's bearing fruit, right? To use the Buford quote, that's bearing fruit in the lives of others. How do we help cultivate that? This is actually deeply demanding work, and it requires what we've talked about in other places as strong and attentive inner work. We cannot consistently seek the good of others without being attuned to what God is up to and responding to the callings that God is asking, is putting on us, not just in the big sense of what do we do and where do we live, but how are we supposed to grow and how are we maturing into Christ? Otherwise, I mean, all kinds of motivations can dictate the decisions we make: anxiety, insecurity, scarcity, complexity, right? Just volatility in general. And when those dynamics drive us, it can be easy to think that we're seeking the best for others, but not actually doing it in a day to day. I mean, I've certainly been in moments, and I'm sure you have too, where without even realizing it, you're avoiding hard conversations or sort of going back to the one person over and over instead of another, and maybe even holding opportunities without even realizing it, or sometimes doing that intentionally, which is obviously not our best moments. Um, the work here requires us both to attend to our own motivations, right? To be able to remove the friction that would cause us to be motivated by anything other than other people's flourishing and prosperous trees for others, but also to see our work as leaders as not just about helping ensure performance, but about being invested in people's formation, about not just looking for people who are competent, but in investing in building up people's character. And ultimately, not just looking for kind of these short term outcomes, but being invested in people's long term professional and life trajectories. It requires us to do all kinds of things. And this is, all over scripture is sometimes saying things that are hard to hear. Sometimes it's about, again, setting aside our own motivations that might be kind of a little bit out of alignment with what we know to be good or true. Sometimes it requires us to hear from people and to take seriously their perspectives, even when we don't disagree with them. Sometimes choose that instead. Other times it's about believing in someone, inviting them to step into responsibility that maybe they don't feel ready for. So you're kind of journeying with them through possibility moments as well. Um, all of this requires a kind of stewardship that Max Dupree talks a lot about. Max Dupree, talks about our first job as leaders our first responsibility as leaders is to define reality. The last is to say thank you. And in between, we're to be a steward to the mission of the organization, which means being a steward to the people who make up that mission organization. When we're thinking about leadership as stewardship of the people who are entrusted to our care so that we can seek their best, people become less about how do we get to strategic outcomes and more about sacred people made in the image of God, right? Which changes how we show up, it changes where we double down, it changes what we're willing to let go of. A couple of questions that have been just helpful for me along the way is, what role do I have in this person's life, right? It's not, we don't want to overassume that, but we also don't want to underassume that. What might God be asking? What might God be doing, forming in them, and also therefore in wanting to form in me through our relationship? And then maybe, so like, what is God up to? How might God be forming both of us? And then therefore, like, what does that mean in a practical sense? How do we show up? This takes time, it takes effort, it takes honesty with ourselves. I think that's probably one of the biggest pieces. Attention, the ability to pause and notice and not kind of rush through to the next thing. So again, this shows up in our healthy marketplace leaders, our flourishing leaders, that people who are flourishing in leadership, the kind of leaders that other people want to follow and trust, are people who know that the fruit of their work bears on other people's tree, and who take time intentionally to in very practical ways exercise that neighborly love that we see in the passage of the Good Samaritan. So let me just leave you with like one simple practice here. And this is like, take a look at your calendar, take a look at whatever you got coming next, a meeting, a day, and just ask yourself, what would it look like for me to seek the very best for the people who are I'm in meetings with, or I'm going to interact with, or who I'm going to see at work today? Just ask that little question and see how God might be nudging you.